Hi everyone, welcome to our foundational video on verbal de-escalation training. For some of you, this might be a refresher. You might get to the end and think, well, I kind of knew all that, and that's okay because anytime we need a refresher, it's always good to hear information again. For some of you, this may truly be a foundation for you, and it might be new information, which is good too. We just want you to have some tools to be able to respond when students are kind of in early stages of escalation. That might be, you notice a shutdown, or their body language changes, or maybe they are verbally acting out and saying some things that might cue you into the fact that they're escalating. So we really want to focus on prevention in this hour and 10 minutes that we have you here today to prevent a student from further escalation. And like I said, just really give you those tools for kind of those low level crisis interventions. So whether you're watching this video by yourself, maybe you're watching it with a group of staff together, maybe you're watching it at a staff meeting, we just really want to thank you for spending some time with us today, and hopefully you find this valuable. If at the end of this you want more, you're like, oh, I loved it and I want more, there will be individual modules going deeper into what we talk about today. So welcome, thank you for being here. We're going to go over the agenda really quickly for today. And if some of this language doesn't sound familiar to you, if you're like, what's the stress model of problem behavior? We're going to talk about that. What are behavior support techniques? You will become very familiar with that language by the time we're done in this hour and 10 minutes. So again, if this is new to you, that's awesome. We will make sure we explain all of these different wonderful ways of verbal de-escalation. Before we get into content today though, we just want you to take a few minutes, and we're gonna do what we call an I'm in. And the I'm in is something that really helps us stay in the present, right? We all have these things going on in our heads right now that are maybe preventing us from being in the present. And when we're in the present moment, we're just more aware of what's going on around us. We're more aware of things that are happening, in our environment. And when we're talking about verbal de-escalation, it really is recognizing what might be going on in the environment to trigger a student, or it really is about being very aware of the cues that student might be giving you that they need some support. So the I'm in is just an opportunity for you to also kind of get rid of all those things going on in your head and really take this time, for you today. Even I know it's an hour, but give yourself permission to take that time and learn, and give yourself some new tools that hopefully you can use in your classrooms and in your buildings. So I'm going to model what it is. You can use this in classroom meetings. You can use this at staff meetings. So what you do is you kind of say out loud what's going on in your brains. We could probably, some of us, go on for minutes at a time. This is really meant to be like 15 to 30 seconds. And we do this out loud. So if you're with a group of people after I model this, go ahead and do that together. So I'm going to model it for you, and then you acknowledge it and you just say, I have all this stuff, but I am in. I am in for me today. I'm in for my students today. So for me, and I'm going to date myself, you're going to probably know when this video was done, but today was my kid's first day of school after not being in school for 6 months. So my brain is just going 50 miles a minute, like, how's it going with their teachers? Are they seeing their friends? Is it okay wearing a mask? All these different things. More excitement, I think, is going on in my head right now that could be distracting me from being here with you. But I'm going to get all that out, and I'm in. I am in for this hour to spend with all of you. So I'd like you guys just to take a second and pause the video, even if you're by yourself, nobody think you're crazy talking to yourself, or with a group of people. Take a second and do that I'm in, so that we can give ourselves that permission to be here today. Okay, welcome back. We're going to move on now and just talk a little bit about what the goals of de-escalation are. Now, when you read this slide, it says to support environmentally and emotionally to reduce stress and risk. I think the most important part about that is we need to be providing that environment for our students to feel safe coming to us when they need help calming down, when they need that support. Them seeing us calming another child helps them learn how to calm with an adult. When we are talking about this today, and I think you're going to hear this over and over, not only do we need to provide a safe environment, but we are doing this with the child. We are providing that support and that learning, and we're doing it with the child. These are not things that we do to a child. So you'll sense that theme throughout today, that these are techniques that we use to provide that safe environment for that child to be able to calm and to be able to stay in the classroom and stay with their peers and learn from us. So I think that's why it's really important that we think about that safety factor, and these are things that we do with that child. We're going to move on to the next one. So one of the things that we need to learn to help children de-escalate is we need to learn what they're like at their baseline. Baseline is a child's typical behavior. Now, not everyone's calm looks the same. You might think about that staff member or that child that comes in every day and they're kind of agitated. That's kind of their baseline. That's kind of their calm. It's really, really important that we learn a child's baseline, because that helps us intervene quicker. If a child that's typically really bubbly and talkative with you comes in one morning and they're quiet and they're withdrawn and they're avoiding even looking at you, that's probably your clue that, oh, they're not at their baseline right now. So what might I need to do to either modify the environment, or what might I need to do to support this child to bring them back to their baseline? So really recognizing the baseline for that child and really forming relationships and getting to know your students is going to be really important to know where their baseline is, to be able to help them calm when they're not at their baseline. And one of the ways that we can think about this baseline behavior is if we look at this stress model. I don't want you to be too concerned about memorizing what this model looks like, but I just want to make sure that you understand there are certain areas. If we know a child's baseline, we can also learn to recognize when they're triggered by something. So if you see there's that looks like a kind of a sun and it's got a circle in the middle and it says triggering event, those are the things we really need to look for in the environment. You know, what might be triggering a child, or if you always pair a child up with somebody else and they always have problems, you recognize, okay, maybe that's a trigger for that child and I need to not pair those two up together. Or if you change the seating in your classroom and you know a certain student that triggers that student if they don't know ahead of time that they're going to walk in and have a different seat. Like, just recognizing what might trigger a student can really help them from escalating further to either verbal or physical aggression or even violent behavior. So again, what we're talking about today can be applied anywhere on this stress model, but we really want to talk about that early intervention and making sure that we recognize when a child is triggered, when they're not at their baseline, and how can we remove those triggers so we don't see that escalation anymore. And I realized I forgot to have my colleagues introduce themselves. So we're going to do that right now before we move on. I'm Stacy Hopkins-Schrump. I am a behavioral consultant in special education at the Intermediate School District.
I am Tate Reminder. I am a climate and culture coach at the Intermediate School District.
Hi, welcome. I am Stephanie Dye, a special ed behavior consultant at the MAISD.
I'm Missy Post. I'm an autism spectrum disorder consultant at the MAISD.
Hi, I'm Vicki Swanson, and I'm a school culture and climate coach at the MAISD.
So now you know who all these faces are that are looking at you for the rest of today. So just to wrap up and kind of recap what we're going to be talking about today on the next slide is this awesome triangle. And we're going to break down these different levels for you today. And you'll see, we start with self-awareness and we're going to move up. And the last thing we're going to talk about is emotional first aid. But one of the things I realized as we were talking about this training that I really want you to think about as we go through this hour and 10, 15 minutes is that these build upon one another. So you're going to hear Tate talk about self-awareness. You're going to hear Missy talk about active listening. You're going to hear Vicki talk about behavior support techniques. And you're going to hear Stephanie talking about emotional first aid. But as we kind of move through this, please keep in mind that we always need to be self-aware and demonstrate active listening, even when we're doing emotional first aid. So keep that in mind as we go through today, that these are all connected and it's a triangle. They build as we go through. They're not separate types of things. So I'm going to turn it over to Tate so she can talk to us about self-awareness.
Thank you, Stacy. So like Stacy said, we're going to start at self-awareness because that's really the foundation. And just like anything, you have to have a strong foundation when you are supporting your students through behaviors or through just emotional dysregulation. So we're going to always start with the 4 questions. And when we think about the 4 questions, when we think about any situation, we always start with ourselves, the student, and the environment. Those are always going to be the first 3 things, and really the constant 3 things that are in our mind during these situations. So that first question, what am I feeling now? So that needs to always be our first priority, is where am I at right now? What am I feeling right now? When I'm getting ready to deal with this situation or support this student through this situation, what am I feeling? Because I can't support someone, I can't help them through something if I'm not okay too. So do I need to take a breath? Do I need to use some positive self-talk? You know, am I busy thinking about everything else that's going on right now and all these other kids that I'm supposed to be teaching this lesson to? Am I thinking about the other adults that might be around and how they might be viewing my actions and how I'm dealing with this situation? So that first piece always has to be that self-reflection and that self-awareness. What am I feeling right now? And what do I need to get to a place where I can support this student? Maybe that's a deep breath. Maybe it's that real quick, I'm in, just thinking that through. Just whatever it is we need in the moment to make sure that we are in a place that we can support our student. The second question, what does this student feel, need, or want? Because as I'm sure you have all heard many times, all behavior is communication. So all behavior is that student trying to tell us what they feel, need, or want, even when they're not aware of it. So that always has to be our second thought. What does the student feel, need, or want? Because maybe it is something that you can quickly provide to that student, help them come back down, and then talk through that with them. So is it that they, you know, something is too loud, something is just really bothering them? Is it that they're frustrated because they don't have a pencil, but they're afraid to ask for a pencil? You know, just simple things that they might be trying to tell us with their behavior. The third question, how is the environment affecting the student? So we all, I'm sure, have heard and know all kinds of things in the environment that can impact our students. The lighting, the noises. Is it a peer that is near them who maybe unintentionally is impacting that student's behavior? Maybe that, you know, one of their peers is just tapping their pencil without even thinking about it. And that's the thing that is escalating that student. So just thinking about how is the environment affecting the student and what could I do quickly to change that? How can I alter the environment right now that might help this situation without it escalating further? And then finally, how do I best respond? So given all of those questions, all of the things that we were looking at and thinking about, how do I best respond in this moment? And these are not, well, I'm going to spend 5 minutes thinking about how I'm feeling and what I need to do to be in a better place and what the student needs and what the environment might be doing. These are just quick questions that we ask ourselves right then. And the more you do it, the quicker you'll be able to do this just automatically. So this will just become a part of your natural response every single time. Rather than reacting to the student or the environment or how I'm feeling, I will just respond and this will become automatic. So it's very, very quick. And then how do I best respond? So what do I do with all of the information that I have? And how do I help the student? How do I support them through this so that maybe we don't need to go any further up that pyramid? With that being said, if those doing all of that doesn't work, or maybe starts to work but doesn't completely de-escalate the situation, then that's when we're going to move on to our active listening. So I will turn it over to Missy.
It always takes me a minute to unmute and figure out my video, but yeah, we're going to go on to active listening. And like Tate said, you know, in order for us to really show up and be present enough to offer that kind of support to our students to actively listen, we have to be regulated ourselves. So that's why that self-awareness piece is so critical, so that we can be present enough to actively listen for our students. And active listening really is at the heart of de-escalation. It gets to a core human need to feel that you're understood, that you're seen and heard. And so when we actively listen for our students, that provides them that kind of support, that they feel that they're someone trying to understand them, they feel that we're seeing them and hearing them. And so it's really important that we use active listening, or it can also be called empathic listening, that we use that in a crisis situation, or when a student's escalated or dysregulated. But beyond that, it's just an important approach when we work with students generally. It should be our default of how we interact with our students, because it does help us to build relationships, to build trust with our students. And if that's how we approach students, that we actively listen, we really try to see and hear and understand them, then they're more likely to seek us out when they're having struggles. It can be a preventative strategy. So it's an important thing that we understand active listening in the sense of, you know, escalation with students, but just in general, that that's just our authentic approach of how we work with kids. So with active listening, it really is us bringing calm into the chaos. And when we think about this, sometimes it's easier to understand a concept when we talk about examples and non-examples. And so for this, we're going to show just a quick video non-example of what active listening is not. So Stephanie is going to cue up a video. No volume, Steph.
It'd help if I unmuted myself so you could hear it. Let's try that again.
All right, so that's a pretty clear non-example of what active listening is not. So as you could see in that example, it's not about fixing the problem for somebody. It's providing space, and sometimes within that space, somebody can have an aha moment and have some ideas of what they might do differently. Steph, you can go back to the previous slide. So it can, you know, provide that space. Someone can have some discoveries of their own during that, but it isn't about me trying to fix the problem for them. And if you think about yourself, if you've ever shared something with someone and their first response is what you should have done, and you should do this or this or this to solve your problem, think if that made you feel understood and seen and heard. For me, it hasn't. It makes it diminish. It makes me feel like my problem really wasn't that big of a deal, that it was that easy, that you had an easy solution right there. So that's what active listening isn't. It's not about fixing the problem for somebody. It's also not about the power struggle. We saw a little bit of that in that video as well. Even if someone shares something that my perspective is slightly different from, or majorly different from, it's not me picking up the rope and having a disagreement on how I see it versus how the other person sees it. So, for example, a student might say something like, "You always pick on me." And I could pick up that rope and say, "I do not always pick on you. You were talking. That's why I called on you." And that right there, that shut down that communication. That's disorganizing their brain instead of organizing it. Now they're in a battle with me. And so instead, if someone said something like that to me, "You always pick on me," my response could be more reflective. "You're feeling like I'm always picking on you or singling you out in class," right? Right there, that opens that line of communication. It doesn't shut it down. So with active listening not being about fixing problems for people and not being about the power struggle, really, what is it? And what it is just a non-judgmental approach. It's me listening to understand. It's me not putting judgment on how big of a problem that is, or little of a problem, or not a big deal. It's not about me judging their perceptions. They're operating on, their perceptions is their reality. So I'm setting aside my judgment during this active listening. There is a time that we talk about size of problem and perspective taking, but not during this active listening phase. I'm really listening to understand. So in order to do that, it takes, some undivided attention. So I don't want to try active listening while I'm taking attendance or I'm doing something else. I really do need to show up, be present to do that. I'm going to be listening for facts and feelings. So I'm going to be listening to what someone's perception is of what happened, the events, and then also their underlying feelings about those. I'm going to be allowing some silence for reflection. So as soon as someone finishes a sentence, I can allow that pause. They might follow up with more information if I provide that pause. They might hear back what I say differently when I restate and paraphrase. I allow that pause. They may add more or change a little bit of their thinking. So really adding that pause also shows respect for what they're saying. So someone finishes saying something and I just say something right back, that demonstrates that I really wasn't listening. I was formulating my thought. So it's just really important that we have that pause. And it's really about that restate and paraphrase that we're going to get into in a minute. So go ahead and turn it, Steph. So with active listening being about listening to understand our students, it's really important that we understand that communication is more than just the words that are spoken, right? And actually the words really convey the least amount of meaning. We get a lot more meaning from things like facial expressions or other, in a more overarching category would be nonverbals, or tone of voice, and that could be in a category that we'd call paraverbals. So, we want to be really aware of those nonverbals of kids. So their facial expressions, their body language, their posture, even how quickly or slowly they're moving. All of those nonverbal behaviors also communicate meaning. And so when we're actively listening, we have to be attuned to those. Even if a student's not saying words, we can learn a lot from those nonverbals. And then also things like the tone of voice or paraverbals. So that's tone of voice, volume, rate of speech. Those all also convey meaning. So, someone's talking really quickly like this, that's usually conveying some meaning. Either I'm, really excited about something and I'm speaking very quickly, or I'm really rushed and hurried. So all of those things convey lots of additional meaning. And so we have to be aware and attuned to those, and also use those in our active listening to help us understand what the student's trying to communicate to us. So with those nonverbals, paraverbals, beyond just words, we also have to be aware of what we are communicating beyond just our words. So, you know, of course, in a crisis or when a student's dysregulated, we want to be aware of this, but just also in general, we want to be aware of what am I communicating by my nonverbals. You know, if a student's talking to me and I have my hands crossed like this in front of me, this might just be comfortable, but I'm communicating that I'm closed off, right? That I'm not really that interested in that. That's non-verbally what that could be communicating to a student. You know, students that have experienced trauma, sometimes having my hands behind my back or in my pockets could be communicating a threat to them because they don't know what could be in my hands. So just being really aware of my own presence and what I'm bringing to either, you know, continue the escalation cycle or to help a student de-escalate, my nonverbals can play into that. Also my paraverbals, so the tone of voice that I use can make a huge difference. The rate of my speech, the volume that I'm speaking to a student, all of those things can help to bring a crisis down or shoot it right back up. And they can also just in and of themselves be triggers for a student. You know, I could ask a student to turn something in, you turn your assignment in, but depending on how I say it and how I'm also holding my body and communicating, that could be triggering. If it's, can you turn your assignment in? That's a very different message. And so just being really aware of how we're communicating our nonverbals is essential. And for active listening and then just generally with our students. So when we're responding during a time of a problem behavior or when students are escalated, it's just really essential that we kind of combine all of these things together. So we need those nonverbal techniques. We need to be aware of having an open posture, a non-threatening posture. You know, if a kid's in a desk, making sure that I'm not towering over them in more of a threatening way, that how I'm standing isn't going toe-to-toe with somebody, you know, especially someone smaller than me, that I'm, you know, using my body in what could be a threatening way. Just being very aware of my nonverbals, being really aware of my tone of voice. When someone shares something, if I'm using a annoyed tone of voice and my reflective statement back, it's not going to be effective. Students are going to read into that I'm being condescending. So just being very aware of those things. And also, you know, we can display more openness as well by using things like door openers. So when a student shares something, you know, we can use that pause and see if they add on more. Or we can try to elicit more information from them by using door openers, like, can you tell me more about that? Or what's that about? You know, when else has that happened? Finding some of those kind of door openers that feel authentic to you is important. It doesn't want to feel like something that you put on just when a student's struggling. It's not a trick that we're doing. We want to find something that's, you know, goes along with my voice, that who I am as a person. So sometimes those understanding responses, I typically use that first example, you feel this way when, or you were thinking this when that happened. For me, it doesn't fit my voice as well to, you know, I hear you saying, but you'll find what fits best for you in those kind of reflective responses. And knowing that with active listening, really less is more. We don't need to go through everything that a student says. We're really capturing the essence, and we don't want to weight everything down with a ton of words. You know, knowing especially if a student is starting to become escalated, their receptive language skills do go down. Think of yourself when you're escalated. Are you hearing and understanding as well? Nope, because you're not at baseline. So just making sure that we're adding back some simple phrases, and it doesn't need to be a long paragraph that we're reflecting. So some examples or reflective responses are here. You know, you are angry about your visit being canceled. I'd be upset too. It can be natural, and you know, we don't want to make it about ourselves, but having a little bit of that, you know, oh, I get where you're coming from, showing that empathy, that's fine. I then wouldn't want to go into, oh, that happened to me and make it about myself. But if I'm, you know, stating how they're feeling, and, you know, and what the event was, I could tack something like that onto it. So we can use just those basic reflective responses, those really simple ones. And then we can also summarize the basic gist of what somebody said. So sometimes kids will give us a laundry list of events that have happened. And what we don't want to do with active listening is, you know, trying to keep track of it and then, you know, okay, first this happened, then this happened, then that happened, and then this happened, and then that happened. You know, that's a lot. If we can find a summary, that can be helpful. So, you know, a student might share with us, you know, a bunch of events of where they had felt left out with this group of friends. And I would capture that theme. So you're feeling really sad because your friends have left you out a few different times, right? So I'm capturing that theme and bringing back that summary of their thoughts. And that helps to organize their thinking around. So we are going to take a minute to practice. We know that this is a video, so we can't practice live with you. But what we're going to do is offer you the opportunity to practice on your own, or if you're watching this with a group or with a partner, you can pair up and practice giving back some reflective responses when somebody shares something with us. So I'm going to practice just by myself and model that, and then I'm going to have Tate and Stephanie practice in a partnership. I can go ahead and turn it, Steph. Thanks. So this is just a list of some common statements from students. You can add to this or use some of your own. So if I was practicing on my own, you know, I would just imagine that someone said something, one of these to me. So I hate it here, nobody listens to me. So I would pause. You hate it here because you don't feel anybody listens to you, right? It may seem simple, but when we learn these kind of behaviors, it does take practice, just like learning a sport or an instrument. We do need to get this into our body and into our repertoire. So please do take time to practice that pause, and practice with that reflective statement. So I'm going to have Stephanie come back on, and Tate. Stephanie's going to be the staff member. Tate is going to be a student, and they're going to practice a reflective response.
I hate having my video on.
Oh, Tate, you seem pretty upset because having your video on is something you don't like to do.
So it seems simple, but in that moment, thinking of yourself, when a student says that, how often do we diminish that? Oh, you just had your video on yesterday, it was fine, you know, or, oh, you like to see your friends and your friends want to see you. So it seems simple, but getting that it to become our habit to reflectively respond, it does take practice, because a lot of times we do try to kind of you know, alter the student's thinking in that moment instead of just listening to what their perception is. All right, I'm going to pass it on to Vicki.
All right, hello. Thank you, Missy. I am going to talk about the 8 specific behavior support techniques, and you're going to hear much of what Tate and Missy has already spoken into within each of these techniques. The goals of these are to intervene really at warning signals in order to prevent those crisis behaviors from happening and to de-escalate potential crisis situations from occurring, and also to help students regulate their emotions in these moments. And so it's important to remember and kind of keep in mind that these are provided from least intrusive to more intrusive. And the key in implementing these supports is to make sure that the support we're using meets the behavioral need in those moments. So I'm going to just briefly go through each of the 8 support techniques, and we recognize that many of you are already using these in your classrooms. And as you listen to these, you might want to just consider maybe a particular student that you have in mind that might benefit from one of these techniques, or a scenario where you remember using this and you might apply it to your classroom now. So the first one we're going to talk about is managing the environment. And when we think about this, we have the opportunity really to manage and structure our environments in such a way that we can avoid setting conditions that could likely increase those challenging behaviors. So a couple examples of these would be considering where we might have a conversation take place. Maybe we have a student that struggled with behavior on the playground or on the bus, and we need to have a conversation about that. We want that conversation perhaps to be in a private place, and we might choose doing that in the hallway versus taking the student to the office, because that environment would convey a very different tone in the office versus the hallway. Another one that we've touched on a little bit already is sitting versus standing. And when we sit down next to a student, rather than kind of standing over a student, we send that calming and caring message with our body language. So for example, we might notice that a student is getting really anxious, and maybe their body language is telling us that. Maybe they're kicking the seat in front of them or tapping constantly on their desk. We might consider going and sitting next to them and using a very calm and caring tone rather than standing over them and ask them what they're doing or to stop their behavior. The next one we're going to talk about is prompting. And prompting is a signal to the student. It signals to the student to either begin a desired behavior or perhaps to stop an inappropriate action. And this is a non-intrusive strategy, really just a simple suggestion that gives the student that little nudge they might need in order to take the next step towards a positive behavior. So a verbal prompt could be used when we want to support a student's ability to move from one task to another. And perhaps we know from previous days and tasks that this is going to be a challenge for this student. So being mindful of we're going to try to prevent that escalation in behavior, we might give the student a verbal prompt that a transition is coming. And that could look like we're going to pack up and go outside in 2 minutes. Or we might say we're going to move from our math activity to our reading groups in 3 minutes. And I need you to do these 2 things before we do that. There are also nonverbal options when it comes to prompting, and that might look like a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or maybe just nodding to help remind the student of what is expected. And nonverbals can also be tangible materials that we create ahead of time to help that student be able to have something to look at to remind them of sequence of events or expected behaviors. Those might be checklists that the student every day is able to check off as they go along. It could be a social story, and perhaps somebody helps the student through that story. It could be an agenda that they just need that visual agenda to be able to give them the prompt of what's coming next. The next one we're going to talk about is caring gesture. So what happens when students are already in an agitated state? We can see that by either what they're saying or by their body language. They're telling us that they're starting to escalate. And as adults, if we take on that authoritative stance and we say, stop now, do this or do that, for many students, that stress is going to trigger an aggressive response where we're trying to de-escalate in those moments. So students who have difficulty regulating their emotions could benefit from a calm and caring gesture from a trusted adult. It's really important to remember that we are genuine and sincere, because students, really no matter their age, can see right through us when we're being insincere. And so we might use a caring gesture when a child, maybe they got their feelings hurt on the playground, or maybe we're just looking at them and we're noticing that they look really sad or down. And we want to let them know that we care about them in those moments. And so we might verbally say to the child, you know, I really like you. Or we might say something like, I care about what happens to you. And a lot of what Missy was telling us was giving us examples of these things to say, I want to hear more about how you're feeling. Carrying gestures can include nonverbals, like a soft touch on the shoulder or a pat on the back, but it's really important before we try to use those nonverbal gestures that we know our students very well, and we know how they're going to react to that physical touch. Because for many reasons, students could have trouble with that touch. The use of touch requires us to have some background knowledge and a very strong pre-established relationship with the student. Okay. Number 4, hurdle help. Hurdle help can be beneficial to students who are facing overwhelming tasks. Maybe it is a science experiment and it has multiple steps, or maybe a math problem that they just keep getting stuck on that first step and there's 8 steps to go. And we notice that this is becoming overwhelming. Maybe it's something that doesn't appear to us that should be overwhelming, but we recognize in the student that it is. And many times we might recognize this if the student just feels that failure is unavoidable. They just can't find that success path is going to be in front of them. So laying down limits or insisting on cooperation in these times could, as we've said before, increase that challenging behavior. And it might be rather to help them, as this technique is called, through those hurdles and get through the roadblocks so they can achieve success and know what success feels like. A couple examples of these might be helping them through those complex problems, scaffolding the directions, or I'll do one, we'll do one together, and then I'll watch you do one type of approach. Those would all be examples of hurdle help. Number 5 is redirecting or distracting. And this might be a technique that you would use when a student or even a group of students really are perhaps off task, or again, this task you know is going to be very challenging, and maybe previous experiences have told us that this is going to be difficult for the student or group of students. And during this moment, you might just intentionally take that pause and give your students a break in those intentional moments through something that you know is going to be a challenge. And those breaks could really be a lot of things. They could be a mindful moment, or a brief fun read, or video snippet. Those moments could be just enough to help that student or group of students kind of quiet their own mind and bodies, and then come back around to the task at hand. And so the method of redirecting a student's energy and attention helps de-escalate that situation, knowing that we're going to come back around it after those moments. Number 6, proximity. And so we've talked a little bit about this already previously, but many times just that mere fact of having a supportive adult close in vicinity will be calming for a student. So we might use this when we notice that students are struggling to stay on task, or perhaps we hear a little something going where students are struggling to get along. We're just going to move ourselves over to the student, to the situation, to help them stay in control. And it's important to keep in mind that many times if we approach students from the side versus coming at students from the front, it's much less confrontational and can just reinforce that sense of control and security. And then we have number 7, which is a directive statement. And at first, this might sound like it's going against some of the other things that we've said. So let me just try to help frame when we might use this. And so these are used when the needed expectation from the student is important enough to risk that it could escalate the situation. But what we need from the student is critical in that moment. And we are confident that the student has the ability to meet the expectation, and that's a really important piece. So we know that the student has the skills needed to meet the expectation we're going to ask because we have saw them do it before. We have practiced those skills and we've seen them be successful. So we know that they can do this, and what we're going to ask them is critically important. We're going to stay very calm ourselves as we respond, and we might use this, for example, perhaps a student got into an argument with another student in the classroom, and they get up and they just walk out. They didn't ask us, we don't know where they're going, they just walk out. But they're not running or screaming or swearing, they're walking somewhat calmly, but we notice that they're heading to the door outside, okay? And we know we can't allow that to happen. And so we might say to that student, please stop where you are so we can talk. We say it in a very calm, but yet assertive voice. We want to be careful that a directive statement doesn't have a questioning or conversation tone. We're just letting the student know what we need he or she to do right in that moment. So we're assertive, but yet respectful. And the very last one is time away. And so time away could be used in a situation where a child needs to be removed temporarily for a brief moment or for maybe a longer period of time, either from a particular student or group of students, or perhaps from the whole classroom. And again, much like number 7, we know that this student has the skills to be able to regulate on their own in some capacity because they have been taught these self-regulation skills, we have practiced them, and we have witnessed them use them in other capacities. So at this point, when we have students that we know can self-regulate, we might ask them to go to a designated area. Maybe that is stepping in the hallway so they don't have to see their peers and their peers don't have to see them. Maybe that is a space in our classroom that we have created to be a safe and calming environment. And in that space that we ask the student to go, they will use their self-regulation skills that they have learned to regain control of their own emotions and re-enter the activity when they are ready. If students are unable to self-regulate, we just send them off to the calming corner or to the hallway. That could really increase their heightened state because they don't know what to do in those spaces. It could be an option that if we need that time away, that we send another staff member with the student to accompany them and help co-regulate and teach some of those regulation strategies. So these are really brief and really quick, the 8 behavior support techniques. This is just an introduction to each one of those, recognizing you use many of these in your classroom already. It's key to remember that these are not problem-solving techniques in themselves, but really methods that we use to assist students to regulate their feelings and behaviors to try to prevent from that escalating crisis situation. And so now we are going to turn it over to Stephanie, and Stephanie is going to talk to us about emotional first aid.
Thank you, Vicki. Yeah, so we are on the last section of this training, and we are at emotional first aid. And like Stacy said in the beginning, we build up each one of these steps to come together. So we're going to use all the skills that we've learned so far about self-awareness, active listening, and behavior support techniques in with emotional first aid. So emotional first aid is, we are now transitioning from supporting the child more environmentally to now more of that emotional support. Our job here is to support them emotionally to reduce stress and risk. So our goal is to really produce that emotional support and supporting them in that moment. So these are what some steps of emotional first aid are. So the first part is seeing the incident from the student's perspective. So this is where we're really focusing in on that second question of the 4 questions that says, what does the student feel, need, or want? What is their perspective in this problem behavior situation or crisis situation? And, you know, what are they thinking? What is their need out of this? The next thing is really looking at helping connect those feelings to the behavior for the student. So when you feel this way, this is sometimes how you respond to that. It could be something when you get frustrated, you start yelling out. It's really connecting so that they're understanding that when this is your feeling, these are sometimes the behaviors that we see. We also then are encouraging the student to be responsible for their actions, right? So we want to help them understand what the expectations are, and understanding that right now they are having a difficult time managing their frustration and stress. And so we want to help them see that, but also still remind them that, there's still a responsibility for them. And emotional first aid is in the moment. It is something that allows them to come back to their baseline, and also to continue learning so that they can still stay in that activity. So these are the goals of emotional first aid. And, really, again, providing that immediate support. This is not something that you wait later after the incident has happened. This is in the moment. This is providing that immediate support to help reduce that emotional intensity. We want to resolve that immediate crisis or problem behavior because we want to keep them in that program. We want them to continue in gym class. We want them to continue during circle time, continue during math class. We want them to stay in that activity so that they can continue learning. This is a quick intervention. It's not something that should last a long time. But again, we're still not fixing the situation. We are providing them with that emotional support to help them get through that so they can continue learning. So these are the different strategies for emotional first aid. First, what we're going to do is, again, you will see that we're using all of the strategies that we've talked about already. We're putting them together. So draining off the emotions. We drain the emotions off by using our reflective statements, showing our active listening, letting them know that we hear them. As human beings, we all want to be heard. And if we are affirmed and understood that we are heard, we are going to feel better and understand that it's not a power struggle. When we drain off the emotions, we actually see it physically. Their body comes down and you can see them calming. They're not as puffed up. They're heightened. You can actually physically see the emotions draining off. This tends to be a statement that I use a lot. First thing, how am I feeling? How am I going to drain off this child's emotions, right? I need to drain off their emotions. Help them understand. Because when we are angriest, we are stupidest. So if we're not able to understand that somebody helps us feeling lower, we're not be able to think through things very much. Because when we're angry, we're not able to see other different perspectives. So which is the next step? Clarifying the events. We have to understand that a lot of times when things happen, students have this distorted view of what happened, right? You did this to me on purpose. Or he or she bumped into me on purpose and they wanted to knock me down. In those moments, even as adults, we have that too, right? We feel like somebody's coming at us and the event happened purposefully. So our job is to help them clarify the events. I heard Mrs. Jones yelling, but I think she was yelling to get everyone's attention, not yelling just at you. Or, I know Johnny was running really fast in the hallway to get somewhere and he accidentally knocked into you. I don't think it was on purpose that he pushed you. Really trying to help clarify the events after you're seeing it from their perspective and draining their emotions. The next piece is to maintain that relationship and lines of communication. So obviously a relationship with the student is a huge thing, but your students and really using what their strengths are, what interests they have to continue to have them talk through it. We want them to talk it out rather than act it out. So if they're talking through that and we can keep that communication going, we're more likely to be able to come to a solution to help keep them in the program and help them de-escalate. These can be things like, I know you got really embarrassed and when you fell down in the hallway and you didn't want other people to laugh at you because it means a lot to you to have people think highly of you. Or I know that book bag is so important to you. You got that from someone very special. And it does mean a lot to you. So knowing those things to help get them to continue talking about it. Or, Jennifer's a great friend of yours and you don't want that relationship broken. Using your relationship with the child to keep that communication going. Because the more they're going to talk about it, the more that their they're draining their emotions and helping them stay in the program. And then lastly, we're going to remind the student of the expectations. So it's reminding them that, oh, okay, well, we remember next hour is math class. We got to make sure we get into class. Or, next time that you're feeling upset, remember you need to come to an adult and ask for help. Or raise your hand next time you have something to say. Reminding them of the expectations. The expectation for them is to participate, to continue to participate in that activity in the moment. This is not a time where we're teaching them. We're not teaching them a lesson. We're still supporting them in the moment. Later on, you might have a more in-depth conversation with them using something like the life space interview, which we're not going to get into today. But however, when we do longer modules, we'll talk more about that to be able to help solve that problem a little bit more if it happens. But still really mediating that situation. That also might mean you might have to pull the other student in that conversation and mediate to make sure that those two are still doing okay so we can move forward in the activity. So again, this is not a long drawn out intervention, it's a short intervention, but these steps, the more you practice them and understand them, they become a simple interaction that helps keep the child in the activity, in the classroom, and continuing to learn. So we are going to show you an example. And after we do our example, I know, again, this is a recording. If you're with a group of people, I would encourage you to role play. With a lot of these activities, you can hear us talk about them and you can hear us give our examples of, active listening and even doing the behavior support techniques and emotional first aid. But the real thing is practicing. It may feel like it's something that going to come easy to you, but in the moment, sometimes it's hard to pull up all of our tools if we haven't practiced them. Just like with students, right? We want them to practice their new skill and role play how to take a break and all of those things. We teach them that piece so that when it's in the moment and they need it, they can use it. So we're asking the same thing of you guys to practice these things so it becomes more a part of you. So we are going to do a role play. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to ask my fellow participants to unmute and show up on our video. So we are going to be a classroom that is a virtual classroom because we know that sometimes this is what we're working with right now. And I'm going to be the teacher and this is going to be my classroom. And we will, I'm going to show you emotional first aid and then we'll process through it afterwards. Welcome, class. Glad that you're here today. So it's so good to see all your smiling faces. I want to start off today to hear about how everyone's evening went. Can we go through and name one thing that went really well for us last night?
Oh, I have something. I had a great dinner last night.
Good, great dinner, good. Anybody else? Tate.
Oh, I also got to play with my dog outside for like an hour and it was awesome.
Fun, good job playing with your dog. That's exciting. Okay, go ahead, Tate. You had something to say?
Yeah.
Parents and I, we went for a walk and it was so much fun.
Good.
Okay, so I played my favorite game last night with my family.
Oh, and then my parents took me out for ice cream and it was so
I wasn't
awesome.
done. I wasn't done. Why? She does this all the time. Why do you keep letting her do that? I'm not even going to come to these things anymore. She's so rude. She does that on purpose. Oh.
I can tell you're really upset right now, Tate. You're really upset because you feel that Stacey keeps talking over you and
she does keep talking over me. Didn't you see her keep talking over? I mean, she did. You called on me. And she just kept interrupting. She's so rude. She does that all the time. Like she's the only important person ever.
So you're feeling upset because Stacey continues to talk over you when you have so much important things to say and you were called on. I did call on you and you were able to share with what was important to you because you felt Stacey continued to talk over you.
Yeah, yes, I did. Like I want to say things too.
You do have a lot
I bet other people do too.
you do feel that other people have a lot of important things to say, and everyone deserves the chance to be able to say it.
Yes.
I can see how that would be really frustrating. I'm so sorry. I I I I think that, you know, you did have a lot of important things to say, and maybe Stacy wasn't totally done saying everything that she did want to say. Um, and you did raise your hand. I was really proud of you. You raised your hand and waited to be called on. And I know it's important for you to tell people what your evening was like, and have your voice heard too. And it does hurt your feelings when you feel like you're not able to get that out and other people keep interrupting you.
Yeah, it's just really rude. I mean, I'm sure she did want to share stuff too. And it does sound cool that she got to go for a walk and everything, but I mean, it's just kind of, it's rude. It's just a little rude.
You don't like it when people are being rude.
No, no, you should be polite. Let people take turns, Stacy.
I know
I'm
it's
sorry, I'll let you do that next time.
Thank you. What a great job. I'm glad that you got to state what you needed, Tate. And I'm glad that you're able to um, you know, understand what Stacy was trying to say too. And I don't think she purposely was trying to upset you. She just had a lot of things to say. And we can go over those expectations a little bit better too. So, but just remember that if you are having a hard time, you can always, you know, put something in the chat too that says, I would like to speak next. And, you know, we don't want to yell at each other while we're on the screen together. But you did a great job of raising your hand. And next time we'll make sure that we ask everyone if they're completely done before calling on the next person. So that's great.
Okay.
Good. Thank you, Tate. All right. So again, showing that how easily I could have escalated Tate more. I could have very easily said, you know what, Tate? No, you don't get to yell out at people, and you don't get to call people rude on here. But instead, I reflected what she was feeling and understanding, and which then allowed even Stacy to apologize to her, to understand, to see that it was affecting her. But Stacy had so much that she wanted to say too, reminding her of the expectations, showing my relationship with her, of knowing that, you know, she does have a lot of important things to say and she likes to follow the rules, using that communication to show her that I do understand. Clarified the events to say I don't think Stacy was purposely trying to butt Tate out. And then also reminding the expectations and giving some different solutions that would be able to help in the moment. Again, a quick intervention that allowed us to continue moving on with the class instead of having to pull Tate out or tell her she can't be a part of it anymore, or even pull Stacy out. I was able to keep them moving while also having her talk it out versus acting it out. Because very easily I could have told her, Tate, that's not the appropriate way to act, and all of a sudden she'd be out of the room, and then I would have lost her in this entire activity. So really using those steps of draining the emotions and making sure that we're clarifying the events and using our relationship. I'm gonna go back to those steps so you can see that. Oops. And reminding the child of the immediate, reminding child expectations and mediating the situation. We got to mediate that situation in that moment as well. So thank you, colleagues, for your awesome acting skills. And again, just to show how easy it can be, but also I can still be my genuine self. And so this can be done virtually, and it can be done in the classroom. And that's the beauty of it, is that wherever you're at, you can use it. This also works well with adults. You know, making sure we're not getting into a power struggle with our colleagues as well. So using these expectations to really help drain off those emotions. I could tell Tate drained off her emotions because she started sitting back. She wasn't as into the camera. She started sitting back. Her shoulders started coming off. So I physically could see her emotions draining too, and her tone of voice coming down. So I'd like you to take a moment, and if you want to pause this and you guys practice this yourself, you can use some of the situation. You can even use some of the quotes from the active listening, you know, about wearing a mask or not wanting to be in this place, and having somebody role play the child and someone being the staff member. And the more you practice it, the easier it becomes for you. So that is the end of our intro training. Again, this was a quick overview of some of the different, four of the different steps in verbal de-escalation and the crisis co-regulation pyramid, skills pyramid. There are 2 more other, and we will get to those at another time. We are going to, like Stacy said, create more modules that go each one of these steps more in depth. So look forward to those for the future, and we'll put those on Learning Stream. And we want to thank all of you for joining us today, and have a great day.